people are really concerned about pornography, and a lot of the resources that are um, available to schools about pornography are quite explicit in themselves, and often kind of have the approach of how do you decide what's pornography is okay and what pornography is not okay. Whereas our approach is, these are the dangers of any kind of pornography. And this is what you need to think about when you're making those decisions.
Julie Maxwell, it's a real pleasure to talk to you. You've got your fingers in so many pies. It's more so than even Mr. Kipling, I think. One thing you're involved with, of course, is the Church of England Synod. And you attended the recent synod, and I understand that during the discussion around the Archbishop's report on families and households, you interjected into a proposal the desire to use the term marriage, because you thought actually marriage might be useful when we make a proposal around what's good for households and families. Tell us a bit about why you said what you said and what the response was.
Yeah, so I mean, the report came out, I think it was last year, and it's a very comprehensive report. There's lots of interesting information in it, and within the report there is lots of talk about marriage. To be fair, there is lots of talk about marriage, and there is lots about some of the benefits of it and how people view it to be important. However, it does also very clearly say that all families are sort of equal, that there is no one ideal type of family. And the motion that was being brought to Synod did not mention marriage in it at all. So I felt that, I wanted to make sure that we kind of had officially, I suppose, that kind of recognition that marriage is important for children, for their welfare, for the stability of families. Statistically, we know that's absolutely the case. So, that's why I brought that amendment. So I did a short speech talking about, the importance of marriage for children, the stability of families, and how that is important to children. And the Archbishop of Durham, who had commissioned the report, he accepted my amendment. But there was then a very short discussion, because basically the debate had been pushed right to the end of Sunday evening. We'd had a prolonged debate on standing orders and ringing of bells, which kind of tells you a bit about priorities, doesn't it, really? So this debate on families and households, which is a crucial debate, was pushed right to the end of Sunday evening, which gave us very little time. So there was two speeches, one in favour of my amendment, one against my amendment. And I think the sort of the basic premise was that if you had marriage in there as being important, what it did then was somehow seem judgmental or negative towards those who are single parents, those who are maybe in abusive marriages, those who've adopted, but I had addressed that kind of issue in my speech, saying that, this is not saying that, people should stay in abusive marriages. Absolutely. This is not saying that single parents don't do a good job, but all of the research shows that, in general, those who are brought up by their biological parents, and that is most likely if they're married, that those children do better. And sadly, the amendment was not carried. So it was tricky. It was tricky, but it was sad.
Yeah, but unsurprising in that environment at this current time in its history.
Yeah.
But well done for giving that a go. You are a paediatrician. You've recently been a community paediatrician. You can tell us if you're still doing any of that. But another thing you're involved with primarily these days is an organisation called Lovewise, who produce alternative RSE materials. And we all know the sort of craziness that's going on in schools these days, and how outlandish and explicit some of the materials are, and how lacking in evidence base, in fact, they are. But you're now looking after an organisation that produces things which do have an excellent evidence base and are much more reasonable when it comes to sensible explanations of all sorts of things for kids. Tell us a bit about Lovewise, what it does, where we can get materials, etc.
Yeah, so I mean, Lovewise was set up in 2002, so quite a long time ago now, by two paediatricians. So sort of a history of it sort of being kind of medical, having sort of a medical paediatric leading, and they set it up because they were seeing an increased number of young people, both in clinics but also in schools. There was a head teacher as well who set it up, and they were seeing the young people experiencing the negative consequences of family breakdown. So that's what Lovewise was set up kind of for. And that's kind of how I got interested in it, because I was seeing the impact of family breakdown on children in all sorts of ways. And on the other side, what I was seeing was that in schools, and we're talking when I first got involved in this kind of 13, 14 years ago, in schools, they weren't teaching them what needed to be taught to combat this. So children were not being taught about marriage. They were not being taught about the importance of saving sex for marriage. And then we kind of see the ongoing implications of that. So that's how I sort of got involved with Lovewise as well. And so what we do is we try and produce resources that can be used by schools, youth groups, parents to teach children about the benefits of marriage, the benefits of saving sex for marriage, the importance of understanding our bodies and the importance of our bodies being sexed, and what that means for puberty and the goodness of puberty. I think our society often tries to make puberty into almost like a medical condition that's somehow negative, but seeing the positives of growing up, the reason why the changes happen to our bodies, and then thinking about kind of how we make good choices for the future. So particularly thinking about younger children, we look at making wise choices in all sorts of areas. So whether that be money, social media, friendships, etc., and then making choices in relationships and how the choices you make now have a bearing on your future, and putting it into that context. So that's kind of what we're about. And obviously we are a Christian organisation and we do it from a Christian perspective. However, we are also medical, so we are doing it from a medical perspective, and actually those two things very much go together. The medical evidence, the sort of sociological evidence, all fits in with the fact that marriage and saving sex for marriage is actually the best way for us.
And you've got two websites which we can put up. Tell us a little bit about the difference between the two websites if people want to go and have a look at your stuff.
Yeah, so the main website is our website where there's information about who we are and also about all the different resources we have. So we have some resources for schools. So some of those are not particularly Christian. So some of those resources I have used in non-faith schools. So particularly our free online resource, which is called Pornography, Dangers and Decisions. That has only a tiny hint, I suppose, of Christian content in it. The rest of it is all just statistics and thinking about the potential harms of looking at pornography. And we also, we have information about those on our website. We also have resources for youth groups and for parents. So we have books which can be accessed for children and young people to read themselves, or for parents to read with them, or to understand how to talk to their children. So we have a variety of resources, and we have plans for sort of some more online type resources that people can access. So that's our kind of main website. We then also have what's called Lovewise Online, which is a website aimed very specifically at Christian young people. So, it's not aimed at sort of the wider world, as it were, but at young people in churches who are wanting to know what the Bible says. But also, again, our articles are often very much backed up by research and statistics, and kind of, so it's not just what the Bible says, it's kind of how the Bible applies to how we live our life in the area of sex and relationships. And we add articles to that website on a very regular basis.
And people can buy, obviously, on your main website, they can purchase physical resources, which they can give to schools or use themselves.
They can purchase resources. So several of our schools resources are available free online. So schools can just go onto the website and they can access, and they can click the link and they can be given access free. So that's always good. Free schools like free things.
Absolutely, yeah. And have you you talk about using them in schools yourself? Tell us a little bit about your work in schools.
Yeah, so it is harder to get into schools than it was a few years ago. I think there's a number of reasons for that. One is that it's harder to teach about marriage in schools generally. I think also with a lot of the publicity that there's been about kind of rogue RSE providers, I think schools are much more nervous about having outside agencies in than they were in the past. And I think also COVID. So there were a few schools that I was going into that just haven't been able to go back into since COVID. And I think partly that schools have changed the way they do things. But I still do go into schools. So one of the things I do is we have a resource called Growing Up, Growing Wise, which is for primary schools, and it's sort of more of a sex education resource. And so that is 3 lessons talking about puberty, growing up, making good choices, what marriage is, what it is that the couple promise to each other, why that's important, and then thinking briefly about how babies are made. But actually what kids are more interested in is how babies develop. They love understanding how babies develop through, from conception through to birth, and then thinking about families and what's important in family life. So so that's kind of for year 5 and 6 that we do that. And the children love it. And, there is, in those presentations, there is some Christian content, but, a lot of it isn't specifically. And then I also go into schools and do the presentation on pornography as well. And that's often very well received by the young people and teachers, because I think people are really concerned about pornography. And a lot of the resources that are available to schools about pornography are quite explicit in themselves, and often kind of have the approach of how do you decide what's pornography is okay and what pornography is not okay. Whereas our approach is, these are the dangers of any kind of pornography. And this is what you need to think about when you're making those decisions.
Which I would have thought is a great way into almost any school, really, in terms of accessing those resources, telling the school these exist, etc., etc. That'd be good. And what sort of age do the resources go up to? So
the pornography, that can be any age, from sort of, I would say, kind of 13 upwards. One of the issues is that the older they are, particularly the boys, the more likely they are already to be potentially addicted to pornography. So I think the sort of the earlier, obviously you don't want to introduce it too early, but because it's not explicit, it can be used quite, younger. So I think, so it can be used with any age. I've used it with a variety. I've even used it in a special school with children with additional needs as well. So and our other presentation, Marriage, Sex and Living Wisely, again, that can be used from sort of 13 all the way up.
And it's quite easy to teach children not to put their hand into a fire without burning them in the process, and that should be what pornography warnings should be about, really.
Absolutely.
But we seem to mess that up a little bit, haven't we? Good. That sounds fantastic. Anything more we need to learn about Lovewise, we can find from the website. We can support you if we want to. And although it comes from a Christian perspective, like you say, it's all evidence-based, and it's driven with a purpose to educating people around very sensitive, very worthwhile matters for them to hear sensible material about, really.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Julie. Thank you for all the work you're doing. You're also involved in organisations like Family Education Trust and many other things. So I'm sure we'll end up speaking to you again. But Thanks for sticking up for marriage in the Church of England Synod. Thanks for looking after Lovewise and publishing those great materials. And I do hope that many of our supporters will come along and have a look, and hopefully even suggest that their school pick them up and use them going forward.
Well, we keep doing what we can do.
Julie Maxwell, thanks for your time.
Thank you.